There's two essentials to long-term healthy marriages or healthy relationships of any kind. The first one is that we keep love alive, that we meet the emotional need for love. And that's what I talked about last night. Now, you can have a long-term marriage without this, but you cannot have a long-term healthy marriage without this. I mean, there are many couples been married 30 years, 40 years, but they live together as roommates. There's no sense of emotional closeness to them. But the second essential is we have to deal effectively with our failures, because none of us are perfect. And you don't have to be perfect to have long-term healthy relationships. But you do have to deal with your failures, because failures create an emotional barrier between us. And that barrier does not go away with the passing of time. It goes away only when we're willing to deal with the failure. And that involves apologizing and forgiving. So I want to talk about these two things. Where do we typically learn to apologize? From our parents. Little Johnny pushes his sister, and his mother says, "Johnny, you don't push sister. Go tell her you're sorry." So little Johnny says, "I'm sorry," even if he's not. He's 23 now. He's married. If he offends his wife, what's he going to say? "I'm sorry." Now, we found out that about 10% of the population almost never apologizes for anything. And most of them are men who learned it from their fathers, who said to them, "Real men don't apologize." Now, we know where their fathers got that. John Wayne, that great psychologist. Real men don't apologize. And when I run into those guys, I say to them, "Listen, your dad was probably a good guy. He probably did the best he knew, but your dad had bad information. Real men do apologize. In fact, you will never have a long-term healthy relationship if you don't learn to apologize." Well, several years ago, a counselor in our city, whom I knew distantly, made an appointment to see me. And my first thought was, oh no, I hope she's not having marital problems, because counselors have problems too. But when she came, she didn't have a problem. She said, "Gary, I have been using the 5 love languages for years in my counseling. It's been so helpful. But I believe that people also have an apology language." And I say, "What do you mean?" I said, "What do you mean by that?" She said, "I think that what one person considers to be an apology is not what another person considers to be an apology." And as soon as she said it, I resonated, because for years they'd been in my office arguing over whether or not one of them apologized. You know, the wife would say, "Well, I would forgive him if he would just apologize." And he would say, "I did apologize. You didn't apologize. I told you I was sorry. That's not an apology." So they're arguing over whether or not he apologized. And so I said, "Well, I think you've got something. What do you want to do with it?" And she said, "Well, I was hoping that you and I might write a book together on it." I said, "Well, if we're going to write a book, we got to do some research." And I said, "I think it's a good idea, but we got to find out if it's really true." So we did 2 years of research trying to find out what a sincere apology looks like. And after 2 years of research, this is what we discovered. If you can pull this off, they're going to know that you're sincere, okay? Well, what we really discovered was that people have different ideas. Here's what we did. We asked thousands of people all over the country 2 questions. When you apologize, what do you typically say or do? Second question. When someone's apologizing to you, what do you want to hear them say or do? And their answers fell into 5 categories. I promise you, we were not looking for 5. I like 5, but we weren't looking for 5. And so we later call them the 5 apology languages. So I want to share them with you. You may want to jot them down because chances are, unless you've read the book or heard this lecture before, you wouldn't know what they are. So let's look at them. Number 1 is expressing regret, often with the words, I'm sorry. But please don't ever use those 2 words alone. Tell them what you're sorry for. I'm sorry that I lost my temper and yelled at you. I'm sorry that I came home an hour and a half late. I know we missed the program. I know you wanted to go. Tell them what you're sorry for. And don't ever add the word but. I'm sorry that I lost my temper and yelled at you, but if you had not, then I would not. And now you're no longer apologizing. You're blaming them for your poor behavior. And if you happen to have that pattern and you think about yourself having said the but, let me suggest the next time you hear yourself say that, I'm sorry that I but you stop right there and say, excuse me, erase the but. And you will not erase it but 3 times and you'll break that habit. So for some people, yes, this is one of the ways of expressing an apology, is to express regret. Feeling badly about what you've done is essentially what you're trying to communicate. I feel badly about what I did. Number 2 is accepting responsibility. I was wrong. Should not have done that. No excuse for that. I accept full responsibility. Now, some of us have trouble with the words, I was wrong. I remember years ago, our kids were little. I said to my wife one morning, honey, where's my briefcase? And she said, I haven't seen it. I said, it was in there by the dresser. I mean, you must have moved it. She said, Gary, I haven't seen your briefcase. I said, Carolyn, think. I didn't get the kids to school. I mean, you bound to have moved it. Think, girl, think. Can you imagine me talking to my wife like that?
No.
Yeah, well, I was nice to the kids, you know, take them to school. Now, have a nice day, da-da-da-da-da. But when I got rid of the kids, I went back to being angry with her, thinking to myself, how could I have married such a scatterbrained woman? I mean, this time she's lost my briefcase. And this was before computers. Everything I owned was in my briefcase. My schedule, everything was in the briefcase. Well, I drove to the church where my office is, and I went in and opened the door, and there was my briefcase. So I called her. I said, hey, honey, I found my briefcase. She didn't say anything. She knew there would be more to it than that. And I said, I'm sorry that I yelled at you. I was wrong. I didn't say it was easy. In fact, let's just see if you all can say that out loud together. I was wrong. Here we go. I was wrong. See, some of you had trouble even on a dry run. Now, incidentally, I believe this is one of the first steps to teaching a child how to apologize. Help them accept responsibility for their behavior. A 4-year-old says to the mom or dad, holding a cookie in their hand, and say, it broke. It broke. And the parent says, honey, let's say that a different way. I broke the cookie. There's nothing wrong with breaking a cookie, just helping the child accept responsibility for what they did. My son was 6 or 7 years old. The two of us were in the kitchen together. He accidentally knocked a glass off the table. It hit the floor and broke. And when I heard it, I turned and looked at him, and he said, it did it by itself. And I said, Derek, let's say that a different way. I accidentally knocked the glass off the table. And he said, I accidentally knocked the glass off the table. There's nothing morally wrong with accidentally knocking a glass off the table. It's not he did something wrong. I'm just helping him accept responsibility for what he did, okay? So accepting responsibility. Number 3 is offering to make restitution. What can I do to make this right. It was very interesting. Before we published the book, I sent the manuscript to a counselor friend of mine in California. And I said, I want you to read this and give us feedback before we publish this book. He came back, he said, Gary, this thing's helping me and my wife. He said, we decided to read it together. He said, on that first one, I'm sorry, I knew that's what I considered to be a sincere apology. And for 15 years of our marriage, that's what I've done. Every time I do wrong, every time I hurt her, I always tell her I'm sorry. And it's always seemed to me she had a hard time letting it go. She just couldn't let it go. We got to this one, and my wife said to me, this is what I've been waiting for 15 years. You have never, ever offered to make things right. He said, Gary, it never crossed my mind. He said, all I ever knew was just, I'm sorry. He said, but now I still tell her I'm sorry. But then I say, okay, honey, what can I do to make it right? And he said, she always has an idea. And when I do it, he said, she lets it go. You see, in her mind, all these years, his apology was just weak. It just didn't communicate sincerity to her. And he says, now I'm doing it. Now, you know, guys, I know you guys who are married would never, ever do this. But let's say you forget your anniversary. No meal, no candy, no flowers, no trip, nothing. And you're sitting there that night and you look over on the couch and your wife is crying. And you say, honey, what's wrong? And she said, I can't believe you don't know what's wrong. And it dawns on you that it's your anniversary. I doubt I'm sorry is going to hack it. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Monday, I was going to make reservations, honey. Oh, I have blown it big time. Oh, honey, I have really blown it this time. But look, honey, I know we can't celebrate tonight, but listen, we can still celebrate, honey. What would you like to do this year? She'll have an idea, a little trip to Hawaii or something like that, you know. She'll have an idea, you know. So, and for some people, this is what they're waiting for you to offer to make things right. And then the next one is genuinely repenting or expressing the desire to change your behavior, which is what the word repent means. Repent means to turn away from. I've been doing this, I'm going to turn away from this. And for some people, if you don't express the desire to change your behavior, you could not be sincere. Very interesting. I was sharing this in my office, and a lady said to me, I can give you an example of that. She said, several years ago, my husband volunteered to take care of our baby. Said the baby was about 16 months old, and I was going to do some other things in the house, and so he was going to take care of the baby, but the baby started crying, and he did everything he could to get the baby to stop crying, pacifier and everything else and all that, and he said finally he got angry and lost his temper and picked up our baby and started shaking our baby and said, stop crying. And I heard him and saw what he was doing, and I ran in there and said, give me the baby. And I went to the bedroom just sobbing to believe that my husband would be shaking our baby. And she said 15 minutes or so later, he knocked on the door and asked me if he could come in. And he came in and started crying and said, honey, I can't believe I did that. You know I love our baby. I can't believe I did that to our baby. Can you help me? I don't ever want to do that again. Can you help me find a plan so I'll never do that again? She said, Gary, I sensed he was so sincere that I forgave him, even though what he did was horrible. We sat there and just talked about what he could do to stop this behavior. And said eventually we came up with a simple plan that if he ever felt himself about to lose his temper with one of our children, he would simply say to me, honey, I'm hot, I got to take a walk. And I would know what that meant. And I'd take over, and he'd take his walk. Then he would come back. He didn't walk all night. He came back. He said, okay, honey, I think I'm under control. How can I plug back in? She said, Gary, that was 8 years ago. He's never lost his temper with one of our children since. He's taken several walks, but he's never lost his temper. See, I had a lady say to me just recently in my office, she said, Gary, He does the same thing over and over. And he says the same thing. Honey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. Honey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. And he does the same thing the next week. And he said it's been going on like this for week after week after week after week. He said he can't be sincere. If he was sincere, he'd change his behavior. See, for some people, this is a necessity for being a sincere apology. And then the last one is actually requesting forgiveness. Will you forgive me? Or I hope you can forgive me. Now, I have to be honest, this one was not on my radar. I mean, I thought if I'm apologizing in any manner, wouldn't you know that I want to be forgiven? Otherwise, why would I be apologizing? But for some people, they want you to verbalize the request to be forgiven. It was interesting, my co-author shared this concept with her mother. And her mother said, I can give you an example of that at work. She said, I have a friend, a close friend at work. We've been friends for 15 years. And I noticed that the last couple of days, she had been rather cold. So at a break, I said to her, is everything all right between you and me? Incidentally, that's the way we should talk, whether it's a marriage or a close relationship. If you sense that something's wrong, just ask, is everything all right between you and me? And she said, my friend said to me, you know one of the things that bothers me about you? You don't ever apologize. Her mother said, I was shocked. And I said, what do you mean? She said, you remember 2 weeks ago when you did da-da-da-da-da-da-da? And she said, yes, I do remember that, but I told you I was sorry. And the lady said, I know, but you didn't ask me to forgive you. And her mother said, I was shocked again. And I said, well, then let me ask you to forgive me. I value our relationship. So will you please forgive me? And the lady said, sure. It wasn't that she didn't want to forgive her. It's that in her mind, her mother had not apologized. So, here's the basic idea. Just as each of us has a primary love language, we have a primary apology language. But with apology, unlike love, it may be more than one of these. That is, there may be a couple of these that are just an absolute necessity for you. You see, we judge sincerity. We don't know the other person's heart, but we judge sincerity by how they apologize to us. But chances are in a marriage, you have different ideas on what a sincere apology is like. And my guess is, unless you've been exposed to this before, if you're married, the two of you have never talked about what you consider to be a sincere apology. And you may never have even thought about what do I consider to be a sincere apology as an individual. So I want to challenge you to do that and have a discussion with each other and ask yourself, So how do we discover our primary apology language? Let me give you three questions. I think these are on the screen. Ask yourself this question. When I apologize, what do I typically say or do? I mean, think about the last time you apologized to anyone. What did you say? If you can't remember the last time you apologized, you may be overdue, okay? But it depends on what their primary language is, whether that communicates sincerity to them or not, okay? The second way to discover your apology language is in a given situation to ask this question. What hurts me most deeply about this situation? That is, they've hurt you. What hurts you most deeply about this situation? And if you say, well, what hurts me most deeply is they won't admit that they're wrong. They said they were sorry, but they won't admit that they're wrong. That's what gets me. And can I just throw this in? Because I've had a lot of guys say to me, Gary, how can I say I was wrong if I don't think I was wrong? And I said, listen, don't get bent out of shape over whether or not what you did or didn't do was morally wrong. If it hurt the relationship, hurt the other person, thus hurt the relationship, in that sense it's wrong. So accept responsibility for it. I'll give you an illustration. I had been out of town a day or two and came home, and they had delivered a chair that my wife had reupholstered. And it happened to be the chair that I sat in every morning and put my shoes on. And so my wife walked in and she said, "Honey, how do you like the new cover?" And without thinking, I said, "Well, honey, I like it, but to be honest, I like the old cover better." And she broke into tears. "I can't believe you don't like it. I spent 2 months going all over town trying to find the right material, and now you don't like it." Now, folks, what I said was not morally wrong. It was just stupid, okay? I spoke without thinking. And I didn't know anything about apology languages in those days, but I poured my heart out to her. "Oh, honey, I am so sorry." And I just told her everything I could ever think of. I don't know if I included all the languages or not, and thankfully she forgave me. In fact, I'd hate to think where we were if my wife had not chosen to forgive me through the years. And I've forgiven her a few times also, okay, just in case you're wondering. Okay, so here's the third question. What could they do or say that would make it easier for me to forgive them? What could they do or say that would make it easier for me to forgive them? If you answer those three questions, chances are you can determine what you consider to be a sincere apology. And if you're married or you have a close relationship at work or anywhere, the two of you discuss this, answer those three questions. Now, you can also go online again to 5lovelanguages.com. And just like there's a free quiz for the love languages, there's a free quiz for the apology languages. And so you can take that free quiz and it'll tell you, what's your number one, number two, and so forth, what you consider to be a sincere apology. Now, apology alone does not restore a relationship. There must be a response to an apology. And the healthy response is forgiveness. Now, what does forgiveness do? A lot of fuzzy thinking about forgiveness. But there's essentially two things that forgiveness does. First of all, it pardons the wrongdoer. It's showing mercy rather than demanding justice. I'm not going to make you pay for this for the next 5 years and hit you over the head with it. I'm going to lift the penalty. The second idea is to remove the barrier, to take away the barrier that this has created between us. Because whenever we do something that hurts the other person, hurts the relationship, it's like an emotional block in a wall between us. And as I said earlier, it doesn't go away with the passing of time. It goes away only when they apologize for the wrongdoing and we choose to forgive and we remove the barrier. And now our relationship can go forward. If we don't apologize and forgive, we'll have another occasion and another block will be added to the wall. And you know as well as I do, there are many couples now who have a long wall between the two of them because they've hurt each other through the years. They've never dealt with the hurts, and they have this emotional wall. And it's hard to communicate. It's hard to do anything. They basically live in the same house like roommates and try to be civil. But forgiveness chooses to remove the barrier so our relationship can go forward. Okay? Now, I want to say a few things about what forgiveness does not do. Number one, forgiveness does not destroy our memory. You may have heard people say, if you haven't forgotten, you haven't forgiven. Folks, that is not true. Everything that's ever happened to us in our life, good or bad, is restored in the human brain. And sometimes it seeps down to the subconscious mind, and we're not thinking about it all the time. But it's stored in the brain, and that memory will come back from time to time. So it doesn't destroy the memory. And secondly, it does not remove all the painful emotions. When the memory comes back, the emotions come back. Now, what are you going to do when they apologized, you made the choice to forgive, And remember, forgiveness is a choice. It's not a feeling. It's a choice. And you forgave them. But now the memory comes back to your mind and the emotions come back to your mind, the hurt, the anger, the whatever. I think you remind yourself, yes, it happened. Yes, I'm still feeling the hurt, but I chose to forgive that. Now let's do something good today. And you move out to do something good and not allow the memory and the emotions to control your behavior. Number 3, forgiveness does not remove all the consequences of doing wrong. Sometimes we have the idea that doing wrong is not all that bad. All you have to do is just apologize and they forgive you and everything's fine. No, we're always worse for having done wrong. I mean, if it's morally wrong, we're always worse for that. Let's say, for example, that I am under the influence of alcohol and I'm driving my car and I have an accident under the influence and break my leg. I can apologize to whomever for what I did. It was wrong. But my leg's still broken and my car's still wrecked. A sexual unfaithfulness in a marriage. Yes, it can be forgiven. Yes, there can be life beyond that. If there's repentance and they turn away from that behavior and come back, yes, you can forgive. But if they picked up a sexually transmitted disease in the process, they still got the disease. So we're always better not to have morally failed. So it doesn't remove all the consequences. And then I want to say also that forgiveness does not rebuild trust. Forgiveness does not rebuild trust. How many times have I faced this in my office when there's been sexual unfaithfulness in the marriage and there's been genuine repentance? They've turned away, they've broken off the relationship, they now are working on the relationship. That's why they're in my office trying to rebuild things. And how many times have I heard a wife say, if he was unfaithful, she will say something like this, or if she was unfaithful, he will say the same thing. She'll say, Dr. Chapman, I've forgiven him, and that's why we're here. But to be honest with you, I don't trust him. And I say, welcome to the human race. Forgiveness does not rebuild trust. Forgiveness opens the door to the possibility that trust can be reborn. And I say in that situation to the husband, if he's the guilty party, I say, if you want her to trust you again, here are my suggestions. You say to her, honey, my computer is yours anytime you want to look at it. My phone is yours anytime you want to look at it. If I tell you I'm going over to George's house to help him work on his car, if you want to come over there and see that I'm there, that's fine with me, babe. I've hurt you too much. I'm through with deceit. My life is an open book. You take that approach, and she'll come to trust you again. It might be 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months, but she'll come to trust. You see, forgiveness opens the door to the possibility that trust can be reborn. Okay? So, I'm going to stop there.